Mountain widow sheltered a starving teen. He stayed and called her wife. Through the howling mountain wind, Ellie Grace heard a trembling knock. Her hand froze on the latch. On Scalding Mountain, no one came without reason. She peered through the frost-glazed window. A figure slumped in the snow, barefoot, barely standing. Ellie unbarred the door. The cold punched in like a wave. A teenage boy stood there, soaked, blue-lipped, face scraped raw. He swayed like a dying pine. "Please, ma'am," he whispered. "I haven't eaten in 5 days. I'll work for a piece of bread." His eyes held no mischief, only desperation, the kind she knew too well. Snow gathered in his dark hair. Ellie's heart, long dormant, stirred with something unfamiliar. Fear? Pity? She opened the door wider. The boy didn't move. Maybe he couldn't. He was shaking, jaw clenched to keep from falling. She reached for him and he flinched. Not from pain but from memory. Ellie didn't ask his name. Not yet. She simply stepped aside. "Come in," she said. And he did, slowly, like a shadow stepping into warmth. Ellie hadn't spoken more than a dozen words to another soul in months. Now there was a stranger warming himself by her fire. She moved carefully around him, filling a pot with water, setting it to boil. The boy didn't speak. He stared at the flames, still shivering. Her eyes kept drifting back to him. His clothes were torn, soaked through. A bruise spread along his temple. He didn't say how he got it. She brought him bread and a mug of broth. He reached for the bread first, like he hadn't seen food in a week. Maybe he hadn't. "You got a name?" she asked. He nodded, mouth full. "Zach." She waited, but he said nothing more. She didn't press. In her experience, truth came slow when it came honest. Ellie hadn't always lived alone. Once, the cabin had been filled with laughter, clattering boots, the smell of stew and pine smoke. Her husband, Daniel, had built this place with her. They'd cleared the land together, planted herbs in the back, raised goats and a wild-eyed mare named Clover. Then came the avalanche. 3 years ago, Daniel had gone down into the mine for an extra shift. She never saw him again. After the funeral, people came for a while, neighbors bringing pies, asking if she'd move back into town. She didn't. They stopped coming. Ellie stayed, fed her goats, kept the garden, repaired the roof when it sagged. The cabin became quiet, not sad, just still. She thought of Daniel now, watching this boy huddled in a chair he once built. Zach finished his food and tried to stand. His knees buckled. He caught himself on the table. "I should go," he said. "You've been kind. I won't bring trouble." "You'll bring frostbite if you step outside," Ellie said. "Sit down." He hesitated, then obeyed. She poured more broth, added extra wood to the fire. Zach's shoulders slumped with exhaustion. He'd sleep soon. She could tell. Ellie stood over him, arms folded. This wasn't what she planned. She'd chosen this life, quiet, contained. But something had shifted. She didn't know what Zach was running from. But for now, she wasn't sending him back into the storm. His name was Zach Harper, 16 years old, with the face of a boy but the eyes of someone who'd walked through too many hard places. He spoke softly, didn't smile much, and carried himself like someone always ready to run. But Ellie saw something deeper, a flicker beneath the exhaustion. Pride, the kind that refused pity. He told her his story in fragments, like someone testing each word before letting it go. His family had once farmed a narrow patch of land near Laramie. Poor soil, better cattle country, but they'd made do with goats and potatoes. When the fever came last winter, it moved faster than any doctor. His mother died first, then his father a week later. No neighbors came to help. By spring, the farm was a husk and Zach was walking west with a sack, a knife, and no destination. He'd worked where he could. Cleared brush, dug wells, herded cattle. Never stayed long. Not because he caused trouble, but because people looked through him. A boy alone was a problem to most folks. They either tried to fix you, use you, or drive you off. Zach had learned to stay quiet, move light, and expect nothing. But he didn't beg. Not once. Not even at her door. "I'll trade work for food," he'd said. lips blue, voice breaking. And now, 2 weeks later, he was keeping that promise. Ellie watched him closely those first days. He rose before dawn, moving slow but deliberate. If he was still weak, he hid it well. She set out tasks, chopping wood, hauling water, and he took to them without complaint. When she wasn't looking, he took on more. She caught him reinforcing a loose rail on the porch. Another day, she found him restringing the clothesline after a storm snapped it. He never asked permission. He just saw what was broken and tried to mend it. She understood that instinct. On the fourth morning, she saw him with the stallion. Clover had never trusted anyone but Daniel. Wild, half-broken, fierce-eyed. Zach stood at the edge of the corral, not touching, just watching, whispering. "I wouldn't try him," Ellie said, stepping down from the porch. "I'm not," Zach replied. "Just getting him used to me." By the end of the week, the horse took an apple from his palm. 10 days later, Zach climbed into the saddle. Clover didn't bolt. Ellie didn't speak, just leaned on the railing and watched something impossible become true. That night, she set 2 tin mugs by the fire and poured tea. Zach sat quietly, eyes on the flames. "I was going to head for Idaho," he said. "Heard there's work in the mining towns." She nodded. "But I don't think I want to keep walking." He didn't look at her, just sipped his tea. "I want to put roots somewhere." "You're 16. I feel older." That was true. Ellie had lived alone since the avalanche. 3 years of silence, save for the wind, the goats, the creak of boards in the cold. She'd stopped measuring time in months, just chores and seasons. Now the days had shape, conversation, a rhythm not entirely her own. Zach cleaned the tools without being asked. He mended the fence after a storm. Once, when she slipped in the mud and dropped a basket of eggs, he didn't laugh. Just helped her up, gently, and cleaned the mess. He didn't pry into her past, either. Not once asked about Daniel. But sometimes, Ellie saw him studying the chair her husband used to sit in, or the carved wooden box on the mantel where she kept his letters. One morning, Zach appeared in the kitchen doorway with a wildflower in his hand. "I saw it near the creek," he said. "Thought the table might like it." Ellie took the bloom, delicate, purple-veined, and placed it in a chipped tin cup beside the stove. She said nothing, but the next morning, she found another one waiting there. After 3 weeks, something shifted. Not loudly, not all at once, but like rain turning to snow. A quiet, permanent change. Zach knocked once before entering the kitchen, even when the door was open. He washed his own clothes, left firewood stacked high, made repairs without a word. He fit into the silence like he'd been shaped for it. One evening, after supper, Ellie stood at the window watching the light fade across the trees. Zach stepped beside her, quiet as always. "I don't want to leave," he said. She didn't move. "Not just for winter. I mean stay. Learn this land. Help you. Build something." She turned slowly. "Why?" "Because this is the first place in a long time where I wasn't invisible. You saw me, that night in the snow, and every day after." He looked away, a flush rising in his cheeks. "I want to belong somewhere, and I'd rather it be here." Ellie studied him. The boy who'd staggered to her door was gone. In his place stood someone steady, stronger now, wiser than his years. Not hardened, just weathered, like the old fence that still stood after a dozen winters. She thought of Daniel, of their first spring here, digging in the frozen earth, laughing when the seeds wouldn't take. They had built this cabin board by board, hand in hand. Could she share it again? With someone new? She didn't speak for a long time. Finally, she nodded once. "You can stay." Zach's shoulders dropped, like a weight had been lifted. "I'll earn it," he said. "I know." From that day forward, it was no longer her cabin. It was theirs. The stove never ran cold. The animals never went unfed. At night, they played checkers by lamplight or read from Daniel's books. Zach asked questions about stars, herbs, weather patterns. Ellie answered without thinking. She began to laugh again, softly but often. He never teased, just smiled like it mattered. And maybe it did. They never spoke of family. Not directly. But once, when a fox got into the henhouse and killed 2 birds, Ellie came outside to find Zack digging graves. "We should bury them," he said. "Even chickens deserve peace." She nodded. He marked the spot with 2 small stones. And later, Ellie found a third beside them. Daniel's old hatchet blade, rusted, tied with twine. "Why?" she asked. "For what you lost," Zack said. "And what you kept." That night, she cried for the first time in 3 years. And in the silence that followed, something new began. Not loud, not sudden, but real. Zack stayed. Through snow and thaw, through windstorms and harvest. He stayed. He patched the back roof before the spring rains hit, climbed up without asking, hammer in hand. Ellie watched from below, expecting him to fall, but he didn't. He worked with quiet confidence, not showing off, just doing what needed doing. He fixed the old latch on the barn that Daniel never got to, rebuilt the chicken coop stronger than before, stabled the goats in a cleaner pen. Ellie had done all these things alone, but now they were done better, faster, with fewer aches. He even taught Clover, the wild stallion, to come when called. "What did you promise him?" Ellie asked once, watching from the porch. Zack shrugged. "That I'm not going anywhere." In the evenings, they drank tea in silence or spoke about small things. The sharpness of this winter, the shape of clouds, the color of wild onions when dug too soon. Zack didn't talk much about his past, and Ellie didn't ask. Some things didn't need digging. But when he did speak, his words held weight. "I used to think nobody stayed." "Not really," he said one night, staring into the fire. "But I was wrong." Ellie sipped her tea. "You're still young." He nodded. "But I know what a lie sounds like, and I know truth when I see it." She looked up, curious. "And what's true?" "That this place has good bones. And you build instead of break." Ellie didn't know what to say to that. She'd spent years surviving. Now, for the first time since Daniel died, she felt like she was living again. One afternoon, she saw Zack leading the mare and Clover in from pasture. His posture had changed, taller, shoulders stronger, steps sure. He was no longer the thin boy who'd knocked at her door. He was growing into himself, slow and solid like oak. He chopped wood without grunting, ate with the hunger of work well done, wrote short notes in a leather-bound book she'd given him, things he wanted to learn, plants he wanted to grow. One night, while folding laundry by the stove, Zack said quietly, "I'm not going anywhere, Ellie." She paused, a towel in her hands. "I don't mean just for winter or spring," he continued. "I mean for good, if you'll have me." Ellie set the towel down slowly. "I've lost a lot, Zack. I know. I don't want to lose anything else. I won't ask for more than you can give, but I want to stay. Not just because I owe you, not because I need shelter, because this is home." Ellie studied him. The lines of his face had sharpened. His eyes didn't waver. There was no desperation in his voice, just quiet conviction. "You're still young," she said softly. The log shifted in the fire. "I won't always be." The room glowed orange and gold. He stood there like a man ready for his life to begin. "You'd give up wandering?" she asked. "I never wanted to wander. I just didn't have anywhere to return to." That truth rang like a bell in her chest. Ellie nodded slowly. "Then stay." He smiled, not wide, not fast, just honest. "I'll build a pen for the pigs next week," he said. "Might even try to fix that south fence." Ellie chuckled. "You're sure you're not looking for a job?" "I've had plenty. This is different." From that day, he stopped asking what needed doing. He just did it. Fetched water before she rose. Checked the roof after every storm. Kept a log of when the herbs bloomed and when the goats needed trimming. Once, a neighbor from the valley came riding up, old Joseph Duncan, who rarely traveled this high. He looked Zack up and down, squinting. "This your boy?" Ellie started to correct him, but Zack stepped forward, met the man's gaze. "I help Miss Grace around the place." Joseph nodded slowly. "Place looks better than I remember." Zack only smiled. Later, Ellie asked, "You mind him saying that? About you being my boy?" Zack shook his head. He wasn't wrong. Spring came with melt and mud. Zack planted potatoes and cabbage. Ellie watched him from the porch, fingers wrapped around a mug of dandelion tea. "You're making ruts," she called. "They'll grow straight," he answered. The days stretched longer. The nights held warmth. The fire wasn't needed as often, but they still lit it, not for heat but for company. Ellie found herself setting 2 plates instead of 1 without thinking. She found herself listening for his footsteps, the way she used to listen for Daniel's. Not with longing but with peace. Zack took to carving wood in the evenings. Small things, spoons, buttons, a comb. He gave her a polished brooch shaped like a pine cone. "It's for luck," he said, placing it in her palm. She wore it every day after that. And then, one evening, as the sun dipped low and the valley blushed with golden light, Zack stood by the gate, looking out over the land. When Ellie joined him, he didn't turn. "I used to think I was meant to pass through things," he said. "Like wind, like dust. And now I think I'm meant to build something, to stay. With you." He turned then, and for the first time his voice didn't tremble. "I want to be whatever you need, Ellie. Son, friend, partner. Just let me stay." She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She reached out, took his hand, and held it. He squeezed once. That was all. 3 weeks after the snow melted off Scalding Ridge, riders came up the mountain. Ellie saw them first through the window, 3 dark silhouettes on horseback, picking their way along the narrow trail that twisted through pine and shale. They moved like men with purpose. Not neighbors. Not lost. She set her tea down and called for Zack. He came in from the barn, wiping his hands on his shirt. "I saw them," he said. "Been watching since they crossed the lower path." There was tension in his jaw, something he recognized in the way they rode. By the time the men reached the clearing, Ellie stood straight in the doorway, Zack at her side. The riders dismounted, 2 men, 1 woman. The first to speak was Pastor Barkley, a narrow-eyed man from the valley who always wore his collar like armor. The second, Roy Trimmer, a rancher with a greedy mouth and a reputation for pushing people off land he wanted. And the third, Mrs. Ada Farrell, whose voice had ruined reputations for sport. Barkley removed his hat. "Miss Grace," he said stiffly, "may we speak inside?" "No," Ellie answered. "Speak here." Roy spat into the dirt. "We've had word from town. Folks are concerned. Say you're harboring a minor." Ellie said nothing. Ada stepped forward. "You're living up here alone with a boy. People are asking questions." Zack's fists clenched at his sides. "He's not a boy," Ellie said calmly. "He works the land, keeps with the harvest." Barkley looked at Zack. "How old are you, son?" 17 in June, Zack replied. Roy laughed once. A sharp, ugly sound. "And you expect us to believe there's nothing improper?" Ellie didn't flinch. "There's decency here, even if you don't carry it in your saddlebags." Ada's eyes narrowed. "This isn't about your character, Ellie." "Yes, it is," Ellie said. And then the truth came forward like rot beneath floorboards. Roy folded his arms. "Your husband filed a claim before the avalanche, for the copper vein under this land. You probably didn't even know it." "I knew." Barkley's voice grew quieter. "If you're judged unfit emotionally or morally, the state will assume control. And Roy here's prepared to buy." Ellie felt Zack shift beside her. His hand was steady. "You think if you paint me as improper, they'll take my home." "It's not about punishment," Ada said. "It's about what's best for the land, for the community, for your pockets," Ellie said. Roy's lips curled. "Watch your tongue." Ellie stepped forward. "You come to my home with lies wrapped in law, but you don't care about truth, just what you can take." Zack spoke then. "Leave now, or come back with a warrant." Roy's hand twitched toward his belt, but Barkley raised a hand. "No need for threats," the pastor said. "We've said our piece." They turned and mounted, slow and smug. But before they rode off, Ada looked down from her horse. "You'll hear from the court soon." When they were gone, Zack paced the porch. "They'll come back, stronger, with papers." Ellie nodded. We've got no defense, Zack said. They'll twist anything. We need something they can't twist. Silence stretched between them. Then Zack said it. Marry me. She looked at him, startled still. It'll make everything legal, he said. They can't say a word if we're husband and wife. Ellie stared. Zack. It doesn't have to be what folks think, he added quickly. But the law will protect us. You. The land. She shook her head, overwhelmed. It's not a game. It's not. But it's a choice. And I'm making mine. His voice didn't shake. They rode through the night. To the west, deep in the woods, lived a trapper named Thomas Shone. A quiet man who'd once been a preacher. He owed Ellie a kindness from long ago. They arrived at dawn. Shone opened the door and said, I figured you'd come. By lantern light, he married them. Quietly, simply. Ellie wore no dress, just her work coat. Zack held her hand like it was something sacred. Shone signed the certificate. So did Ellie. So did Zack. When they returned to the cabin the next morning, Roy and the sheriff were waiting. Barkley and Ada stood off to the side. The papers were already in the sheriff's hand. We're here under state order, the sheriff said, to assess moral fitness and begin proceedings for seizure of property. Ellie stepped down from the horse, calm as rain. Zack handed over the marriage document. The sheriff unfolded it. Read it. Read it again. The silence that followed was thick. You're married? Barkley asked, disbelieving. To each other? Ada added, like the words burned her tongue. By the law, Zack said. Filed and signed. You haven't won, Roy snapped. We didn't come to win, Ellie said. We just didn't give up. And with that, she took Zack's hand, and together, they walked inside. The marriage certificate changed everything. On paper, they were untouchable. The sheriff folded the document with a frown and rode off without another word. Barkley muttered a blessing he didn't mean. Ada looked like she'd swallowed fire. Roy stayed the longest, glaring up at the cabin as if willing it to collapse. He said nothing, just spat in the dirt and turned his horse downslope. But Ellie knew it wasn't over. That afternoon, Zack replaced the latches on the windows. Ellie sharpened every blade in the cabin. Not from fear, from principle. They'd built something honest. And honesty needed protecting. For days, no one came. The mountain was quiet again. Snow clung to the ridges. The chickens clucked like nothing had changed. But Ellie's hands stayed close to the rifle behind the stove. Zack kept working. He built a new pen, cleared brambles from the west trail, cut firewood until his palms bled. When she asked why, he just said, if they come back, they'll see this land isn't abandoned. A week passed. Then came the letter, stamped with an official seal. Folded tight, delivered by a rider who said nothing and left before the door opened. Ellie read it aloud. Roy had filed a protest, claimed the marriage was fraudulent, that it was done solely to block land seizure, that Ellie had coerced a minor, that Zack was in danger. Zack scoffed. I've lived in danger. This ain't it. But Ellie knew what it meant. More hearings, more whispers, more chances for them to twist her life into a weapon. That evening, she sat on the porch while Zack packed tools into the shed. They won't stop, she said. He looked over. I'm not afraid. I am, she whispered. Not of them, of what they'll make us become. Zack set the tools down, walked to her, sat beside her on the step. They can say what they want, he said. But they didn't see you give me bread. They didn't watch you save a stranger. I did. She didn't answer. But she leaned into him, her shoulder brushing his. 2 days later, they rode into town. Not to defend themselves, to be seen. They walked together through the main street, heads high. Ellie wore her old green coat. Zack wore his patched boots and clean shirt. They stopped at the post office, then the general store. People stared, but no one spoke, until an old woman at the counter, Mrs. Melberry, who'd once lent Ellie a pie tin, looked up and said, Glad you found company again, dear. Ellie blinked, then nodded. By the time they left town, no one was whispering. They were watching, thinking. reconsidering, because the truth had walked in beside them. Steady, calm, unashamed. That night, back at the cabin, Ellie stood at the window long after Zack had gone to bed. The moon spilled over the hills. The trees swayed in silence. Let them come, she thought. Let them try. This mountain answers to no court. And kindness doesn't need permission. 7 years passed on Scalding Mountain. The world below changed. Rail lines pushed west, towns grew fat with new money, and men who once wore hats in church now wore pistols on their hips. But up here, in the cabin built by Ellie Grace and her first love, time moved by seasons, not headlines. Zack stayed. He never once looked back. The boy who'd arrived barefoot in the snow was now a man. Taller than Daniel had been, broad-shouldered, with hands calloused by labor and eyes steadied by purpose. His hair was longer now, his voice deeper. But he still rose before dawn and still walked with the quiet of someone who once had nothing. Ellie's hair turned white. Not soft gray, but winter white, like drift on a ridge. Her back stiffened some, her fingers ached in the mornings. But her eyes were sharp, and her steps sure. Zack still called her Ellie. Never ma'am, never wife. Just her name, always spoken with care. Their land flourished. The earth was good. It gave them horses, herbs, and silence. They sold enough to get by, no more. Ellie taught Zack everything she knew. How to dry healing leaves, how to cut hooves in spring, how to feel the air shift before snow. He kept a journal of it all. He said he wanted to pass it down one day. The copper vein Daniel had claimed long ago proved real. Men came up from the valley with hats in hand and contracts in their pockets. Ellie listened. She poured tea. Then she told them no. We live here, she said. Not for wealth. For life. Zack agreed. Always. They built nothing grand. The cabin remained simple. Smoke curling from the chimney. A braided rug by the door. Shelves lined with glass jars and pine cones. But inside, there was warmth. Laughter. A life not marked by extravagance, but by grace. Folks still whispered about them. About the age difference. About how it all started. But over time, the gossip quieted. Some came to trade. Others came for help. With a sick calf, a broken fence, a child too wild for town. They found kindness in Ellie's eyes and steadiness in Zack's hands. One spring, the widow Everett came to buy a horse. Her boy followed Zack around for an hour, full of questions. Later, she said, "He doesn't talk to most men. Says yours is the only voice that doesn't scare him." Zack didn't reply, just offered her a better price than she expected. That was how things went. Quiet strength. Quiet love. Each morning, Zack laid kindling while Ellie cooked oats. Each night, she folded his shirts by the fire while he sharpened tools or read from Daniel's old books. They never spoke much of the past. But once, on a windless night, Ellie sat on the porch watching the moon rise. "Do you ever wonder what they say down there?" she asked. Zack didn't look up from his whittling. "I don't." "Why not?" "Because they didn't see what I saw. You, that first night, standing in the doorway." She was quiet a long time. Then, softly, "And what did you see?" He looked at her, truly looked. "Home." She closed her eyes. Let the words sit inside her chest. The years made them slower, but never less sure. The love between them didn't burn, it warmed. It held. When Zack turned 24, Ellie baked a peach pie and gave him Daniel's compass. "I never wanted it buried," she said. Zack ran a thumb over the brass. "I'll never need it. I'm not going anywhere." One day, a young woman from town came up the trail. She was a teacher. Said she'd heard Zack trained horses and wondered if he'd teach her brother. Ellie invited her in. Served tea with mint. The girl looked around the cabin and smiled. "It feels peaceful here." Ellie nodded. "It is." That night, Zack fixed the door latch while Ellie read by lamplight. "You ever regret it?" she asked. He glanced up. "What?" "This life." "Me." Zack didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, "If you weren't here, I'd still be walking. I'd still be hungry." He stood, crossed the room, took her hands. "I'd choose this 1,000 times." Ellie looked down at their fingers. His large and weathered, hers smaller, lined, trembling just slightly. She brought them to her cheek. Outside, wind moved through the trees. Inside, the fire crackled low. She whispered, "Some stories begin with a knock on the door." Zack kissed her forehead, soft as breath. "And end," he said, "with someone answering it."